Everitt.
Zoological Society of London Leases Bill not amended in committee to be considered.
We now come to amendment number 1, Sir Christopher Chope.
Not moved, sir.
Not moved.
Consideration completed.
Further consideration?
Consideration completed.
Consideration completed, I beg your pardon, thank you. Third reading what day? King's consent? There will now be a short pause. While
Tell us the story.
Point of order, might be nice.
any ideas, any advice?
Invite a point of order. What's point of order? Some sort of point of order.
Did I hear a point of order? Sir Christopher Chope.
Mr. Speaker, can we move on to the next business, please?
Technically, no, not at the moment.
But on the point of order.
A point of order, Thérèse Coffey.
At what point can we make speeches on the London Zoo bill? Do we?
I don't think it's technically possible, is it?
Once the third reading debate has been commenced.
Right.
Once the third reading debate has
The answer to that is once the third reading debate has been commenced.
You're a Privy Councillor. I'm not a member of the government. You're a Privy Councillor.
Right. King's consent.
Yes, it has been given.
signified possibly.
Thank you all very much indeed for your accommodation. Bob Blackman to move third reading.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In answer, by the way, to my right honourable friend who had an amendment on the obviously on the order paper for the position, can I just say that this was the subject of a great deal of discussion and debate with both the Ministry, the sponsors and myself. And with permission, Mr. Speaker, I will happily move third reading, and I beg to move that the bill be read the third time. Now, the reality is that when we are looking at this particular bill, if I can get to my right place in my notes. Yeah, thank you very much. I enjoy heckling before I've even gone. I will indeed.
So it's good news that I actually want to thank my honourable friend, the member for Christchurch, for having withdrawn his amendment, and I think that follows various discussions. I wonder if my honourable friend for leading this bill could explain why in particular it's really important and is timely to make sure that we get third reading today to allow its progress into the other place.
I thank my right honourable friend for that intervention. If I could just explain the position in relation to particularly the length of lease, which I think is important here, which was the point of contention. Namely, that this was the subject for discussion and debate with the Ministry. Originally, the proposal, I think, from the Minister was indeed for a 100-year lease extension, and indeed that would not have allowed ZSL to actually get the investment that is required in order to lengthen the lease, get the investment in that is required to renovate the site of London Zoo, which has been a position whereby London Zoo has been literally had the big animals moved up to Whipsnade Zoo so they can roam freely, as we would all like, which means that the cages in which they were kept now are redundant and need to be completely changed, removed, and modern facilities provided. So, as a result of that, we have agreed the compromise at 150 years. I will indeed.
Very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. I just wonder if, for the clarity of the House, he could outline to us when the current lease that the Zoological Society has commenced.
I would like to thank my honourable friend for that intervention. But I don't have that detail to hand, I have to say. What is important, however, is that the lease is ongoing and therefore is running out. Under the Crown Estates provision, this is what London Zoo was unfortunately left out of when we did the extension to Kew Gardens. And so we are trying to keep this in keeping with Kew Gardens as per other Crown Estates. So this is the crucial element to it. So it's been a privilege to actually take the bill, my third private member's bill, through Parliament. And since visiting the zoo back in January 23, I've worked with a range of people to get to this stage, without whom it would not have been possible to get here. Now, the zoo, situated in Regent's Park, is home to more than 14,000 animals. It's a true London landmark, and if my colleagues haven't visited, I recommend that an abundantly enjoyable, interesting and captivating day out, with the added bonus of only being a short tube journey from this place. Now, every year, tourists from London, the wider UK and the entire globe visits the zoo. This contributes to the UK's wider economy, as visitors are more likely to spend money in the surrounding areas, particularly as it's only a stone's throw from many of the other London's cultural hotspots. Yes, indeed.
My honourable friend's making an excellent speech on a really important topic, and that visitor economy is absolutely essential to all parts of our country, but really, really important to London. Does he know how many visitors internationally travel and visit the zoo each year?
I thank my honourable friend. I'm coming on to that in a few moments. However, the key point here is that the zoo is responsible for contributing £24 million to the local economy, as well as obviously the income to the zoo that maintains the research and keeping threatened species safe. And community outreach projects are instrumental in the philosophy of the zoo. Now, on my visit, I was very impressed by the new garden area, where volunteers with complex needs can spend the day gardening and visiting the animals for much-needed respite and well-being. The zoo have also recently implemented a community access scheme to enable those on income support and other benefits to be able to visit for as little as £3. Now, in the recent February half-term, taking my honourable friend, 50,000 visits were facilitated through this. It's essential that everyone, regardless of where they live, has access to nature and outdoor space. I'm therefore pleased that ZSL are committed to providing access to those who need the extra help so that no one is left out. Indeed.
For giving way. The reputation of the zoo sector more widely has come in for a bit of examination over the past decades, as perhaps correctly they came in for criticism of enclosures which were too small, and this concern that we were starting to look at animals as objects for entertainment as opposed to the preservation of rare species. So I'd be grateful if my honourable friend could to expand a little bit on the steps which this zoo has taken to move away from perhaps the outdated approaches of zoological societies in the past, and how they're leading the fight to retain really rare species for reintroduction into the wild.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and clearly the decision being made for the larger animals that need access to roam and more exercise, to move those, because ZSL run Whipsnade Zoo as well, to move them to Whipsnade has meant those larger animals get the space they need to roam and be more as if they were in the wild whilst being protected. That means, of course, that those facilities that were at London Zoo, and this is precisely the reason for the bill, those facilities now are redundant. They need to be replaced. They need to be replaced with modern facilities for other protected species that need suitable accommodation, can be put in those facilities, and indeed that visitors can see them in those protected areas, where these are species obviously that don't need to roam, but will be given modern facilities as well. And I would encourage other zoos across the country and across the world to consider the same thing. I give the weight again.
Thank you. I'm very generous with his time. It brings me on to the built structures which make up the zoo. And the zoo has been in that location for well over 100 years, perhaps 200 years. And some of the structures, which I bring my mind back to when I visited as a child myself, are of considerable architectural merit and perhaps historic merit. So what steps is the zoo taking to change the built structure to make it more appropriate for their modern usage of the site, whilst at the same time protecting perhaps listed buildings, if there are some, but also the architectural merit of the historic Victorian enclosures?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and clearly there is a concern that many of these structures are indeed protected, and that's one of the reasons why it's so expensive to bring them up to modern standards whilst retaining the original architecture. If it was a simple case of demolishing and putting new facilities in, then there will be less cost. That is one of the reasons why a very large-scale investment is required, which obviously the zoo cannot maintain from its own resources. They have to borrow the money in order to provide that, and then as a result of that, need the lease to be long enough in order for investors to put the money in, knowing that the revenue will come in from visitors and other attractions, and therefore they'll recover their funds. So this is part and parcel of why this is such a vital bill to safeguard London Zoo for the future. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you, and I know he's aware that ZSL have highlighted that the existing lease conditions are limiting their ability to fundraise and create partnerships and expand the support programmes that they are delivering, and of course invest in that vital physical infrastructure renovation that they need to do. But would he confirm to me that this law in and of itself does not automatically extend the lease to 150 years, but it does allow the Department of Culture, Media and Sport to offer this lease? So it's not kind of automatic, but it is a step in the right direction to enable that support for the zoo.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and clearly that is what we hope to hear from the Minister later on during this debate. I mean, clearly we are in a position whereby we're making the offer. We'll have to see about that negotiation to make sure there is suitable protection that were such terrible events to occur that ZSL should no longer have that lease, then it would be removed. However, they've operated very successfully on the site for many years, and therefore I don't see that is likely to happen. Moving on, the educational offerings provide a critical supplement to classroom working for many, many children. And in fact, many of us will have had the opportunity to visit the school as children. And the workshops that are specifically tailored to cater for all age groups and learning needs, educating children on a hugely important topics, including wildlife, conservation, climate change, and the impacts of pollution. Now, the zoo's research has benefited animals perhaps the most, shaping the future of many previously endangered species. Many animals at risk of extinction have participated in the zoo's breeding programme to ensure they're saved for future generations. In 2021-22 alone, £17.4 million was spent on conservation science and field conservation programmes. That included £38.5 million on conservation animal care, breeding programmes and conservation translocations. Now, in the coming months, I'm pleased that the zoo will be returning the previously endangered Guam kingfisher back into the wild. Only recently, over the Easter break, 3 endangered Asiatic lion cubs were born at the zoo to doting parents, 7-year-old mum, Eria the tiger, and 14-year-old dad, Banu the tiger. The animals don't recognise working hours, annual leave or bank holidays. They need supervision and care 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to ensure they're fed and cared for whenever needed. And that emphasises the need for the dedicated and thorough programme that the zoo operates on. It is profusely clear that the zoo is an integral part of society, and thus we must protect its heritage and position. I'm pleased that we've made it to third reading. I'm confident that on hopefully receiving royal assent, the future of the zoo will be much more stable and a brighter, increasingly attractive opportunity for investment purposes. I would like, indeed, I could wait.
Sorry, I can tell that the honourable gentleman is coming towards the end of his comments. I just wanted to hear his thoughts. So I'm very glad to hear that. But looking at the wording of the bill, there is a question mark over its drafting that I'd be grateful if you could help explain to me. Because we can see in Clause 1 that this is in relation to certain land in Regent's Park, the potential to substitute 150 years for 60 years, but it's very specific, the potential powers in relation to certain lands and leases relating to Regent's Park in London. And yet in Clause 2, under extent commencement in the short title, Clause 2.1, it says that this Act extends to England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. So can you clarify for me, what is the need for the extension to the jurisdictions of Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland when the lease is particular to Regent's Park in London?
Thank you. Well, clearly, I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. Clearly, that we are looking at a lease and leasehold law, and that is the reason for clarifying that particular issue in that particular way. I would like to thank first Matthew Gould, the Chief Executive Officer for ZSL. Matthew and I have crossed paths on several occasions prior to his appointment in his previous positions as the government's first Director General for Digital and Media at DCMS, the department, and as Britain's ambassador to Israel. Therefore, it feels fitting to have come full circle and be working with him on this bill over the last year. Now, his devotion to the welfare and happiness of the zoo animals is steadfast, with a commitment to the research and development of species across the globe and in tackling the world's challenges, including the current biodiversity crisis. My next thanks goes to Vicky Godwin, the Senior Public Affairs for the Zoo. Vicky has been on hand throughout the bill, facilitating the discussions between the department, my office and ZSL. She's also come in to support every step of the way, watching the debates and the various stages. So the colleagues who've helpfully sat on the Bill Committee and allowed it to pass unanimously with no amendments, I'm very grateful. It was super to hear the support for London Zoo from so many highly respected members, from both in and outside of London. Some, like a previous employee, the member for North Herefordshire, who was a keeper at London Zoo in his distant past, was a more vested interest, and his personal experiences were interesting, to put it mildly, at the committee. I would also like to thank the clerks of the Public Bill Office, who bared with us through the process, informing my office on procedure, developments and particularly for their patience during the mad scramble to ensure that we had enough members serving on the committee ahead of the deadline. I know that many, they often get overlooked in this place, but their work is absolutely crucial to ensure the proceedings of the Chamber run smoothly, and we're all very grateful for all that they do. Now, the Minister and officials in her department have supported the bill throughout, which I'm exceptionally grateful. Their advice and assistance on drafting the bill have been invaluable, and indeed they redrafted our original draft, and it's great that the government is supporting this worthy change in the lease, which benefits the zoo, the local area and obviously all the potential visitors. Now, I've no doubt that should she, and indeed any other colleague, wish to visit the zoo, they would be greeted with open arms to meet many of the friendly faces, both human and animals. I'd also like to thank my Parliamentary Assistant, Hattie Shoesmith, as always, when she drafts these speeches, misses herself out of the thanks, but I'd like to put on record my thanks to her. And so I would just remind colleagues about some of the endangered species and some of the particular zoo animals that have been protected as a direct result of enabling this bill to come to fruition. First, and one of my favourite animals, was Guy the gorilla. Now, Guy Fawkes Day in 1947, a very small gorilla arrived at the London Zoo clutching a tin hot water bottle. At first, he would only respond to French, as he spent the previous 6 months in the zoo in Paris. Guy became one of the zoo's best-loved characters, and I remember seeing him as a young boy. So when sparrows entered his enclosure, he would scoop them up gently and peer at them before letting them go. Tragically, he died of a heart attack after having a tooth extracted in 1978, and his statue is much loved by London Zoo's visitors today. Second is Goldie the eagle. Now, I remember this as when I was in primary school, that Goldie the Eagle escaped in 1965. We became obsessed with Goldie for almost a fortnight because he appeared on TV and in the press and was cheered wildly, even when mentioned in this place, in the House of Commons. 5,000 people caused traffic jams around Regent's Park as he flew from tree to tree. After 11 days and 19 and a half hours, he was finally recaptured and brought back to the zoo. Now, the only quagga to ever been photographed alive was at London Zoo. There are officially 5 photos of a quagga, providing the only insight into what a living quagga looked like after the species became extinct in 1883. Thousands of quagga once grazed on the plains of southern Africa, and today they provide a reminder of the importance of wildlife conservation. Pipperluck, the male polar bear, was born at London Zoo on the 1st of December 1967. It was the only male polar bear cub successfully reared at the zoo. The name Pipperluck was chosen from a list of Inuit names, meaning the little one. Now, Pipperluck's parents, who'd arrived as young cubs from Moscow Zoo in 1960, were called Sam and Sally. They were named after the zoo's bear keeper, Sam Morton, and his fiancée. Pipperluck left London Zoo in 1985 when the Mappin Terraces, which housed all the bears, were closed, and died, very sadly, at the age of 22 years in a zoo in Poland. Indeed, I'll give way.
My honourable friend for giving way, and he's giving us a fantastic story of the remarkable work that the London Zoo is doing. I wonder, does he have any statistics about the numbers of animals that they have been able to protect and return to the wild through their amazing conservation operations?
I thank my honourable friend. The reality is there are 10,000 animals, species at the zoo. I suspect I would try the Deputy Speaker's patience were I to list all of them. But indeed I will give some of them. But I'll move on to Jumbo the elephant, because Jumbo is believed to have been born about 1861. And when still very small, he arrived at the zoo in the Jardin des Plantes in Paris. In 1865, he was sent to London Zoo. On arrival at the zoo, he was in dreadful condition, but placed in the care of Matthew Scott, a former antelope keeper, but he flourished. Jumbo was so famous, he's had a lasting impact on the English language and helped make the word jumbo a synonym for big. A female African elephant, Alice, arrived a few months later, and the two elephants became associated in the public mind. Jumbo was soon trained to give rides and became a great favourite, largely because he had such a very good nature. And by the early 1880s, Jumbo was nearly 11 feet tall. Very sadly, Jumbo was killed in a railway accident in Canada in 1885.
Order. I don't wish to appear churlish, and the honourable gentleman will be fully aware that I have a personal interest in these matters. But it would be helpful, I think, if he were to relate the catalogue to the reasons for extending the lease. Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I think I take your remarks cognizant with. The reality is that with well over 10,000 animals, as has been said, at the zoo, colleagues will understand, but there are many endangered species that would not be able to be preserved were the zoo not to be present. And the reality is, if we don't extend the lease, the zoo will not continue. So that is the reality of where we are. And there are many endangered species, and I could go through many of those, including the Annaman leaf turtle, the Asiatic lion, which I've mentioned, the Lake Oku frog, mountain chickens, the northern white-cheeked gibbon, all of which are at the zoo and are endangered species, the Philippine crocodile, the ring-tailed lemur, the Sumatran tiger, where there's only 400 left globally, the Waldrat ibis and gorillas that are all endangered species, the white-naped mangabe, and indeed the Chinese giant salamander, and finally pangolins, which are all indeed endangered species which are in the zoo at the moment. But I will indeed.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful for giving way one more time. I very much hope that this bill proceeds and that we, through the extension of the lease, we can secure the futures of these endangered animals. If that were not to be the case, what would happen? What is the plan B for the Zoological Society for the maintenance of these programmes and also just the livelihood of the animals which they look after currently?
And of course, one of the things that I haven't mentioned during my contribution is the immense zoological research that is done by world-famous scientists. We know, for example, that Darwin performed his research at London Zoo, and therefore he came up with the theory of evolution. That would not have happened without London Zoo. We also know that there are thousands of scientists who are at the zoo who do brilliant work and do wonderful research. And I would recommend any colleague who wishes to look at what happens in terms of zoological research to go and visit, see some of the research that's done, and recognise that were it not to have visitor attractions and bring in revenue, then literally the zoo would cease to exist. If we don't extend the lease, the reality is the zoo will continue to run down, it will not have the investment that is required, and therefore it cannot continue its excellent work. So the reality is that unless we carry out this bill, carry it forward into law, the zoo will not have a capability to raise the money that is needed to do all this wonderful work and preserve these endangered species. Therefore, what would happen is, unfortunately, the endangered species across the world would actually become extinct. And I think that is the harsh reality and why this bill is so important. So, as I come towards the conclusion of my remarks for this particular bill, the Zoological Society of London Leases Bill, I would just remind colleagues of the imperative contribution London Zoo and ZSL have made to our world over the last 200 years. So to begin, as I've said, Charles Darwin conducted many of his studies, and therefore we would not have had the theory of evolution. Another notable character is Winnie the Pooh. Harry Collarbone was a member of the Canadian Army Veteran Corps in the Great War. Whilst travelling across Canada to join his regiment and serve in World War I, he bought a female black cub in White River, Ontario, from a hunter who had killed her mother. Collarbone named the bear Winnie after his then hometown, the city of Winnipeg. When Lieutenant Collarbone's regiment was sent by train to England in 1914, Winnie accompanied him. She became a pet, an unofficial mascot to the 2nd Canadian Infantry Brigade during their time on Salisbury Plain. Collarbone was not, however, permitted to take Winnie with him when the brigade deployed to the battlefields of France. He left her in the keeping of London Zoo on the 9th of December 1914, hoping to return after the war to reclaim her. Now, Collarbone served heroically during the war, rising to the rank of captain. Although he visited his beloved Winnie when he was on leave from France, he ultimately decided that the zoo was the best place for her to live. He donated her permanently in gratitude for her care in 1919. Amongst the children of London who continued to be smitten by Minnie in the coming years was a young boy called Christopher Robin, who repeatedly begged his father, the author A.A. Milne, to take him to the zoo. He would feed Winnie spoonfuls of condensed milk in between big, furry hugs. And from there, the stories of Winnie the Pooh became. And of course, the late Queen was a great fan of Winnie the Pooh as well, as we know. I will indeed.
I wonder if you could point out to the House for clarification if the zoo has a current royal patron, and if so, who that is.
Indeed, the King, of course, is greatly enamoured with both the wildlife and London Zoo, and therefore I'm delighted, of course, that he's given King's consent to this bill. In terms of the actual royal patron. Sorry, so the honourable gentleman is chuntering of a sedentary position. I'll take his intervention if he would be good enough to do so.
It was really a sort of point of order. I think it's not appropriate for anybody in advancing a piece of legislation to claim the monarch's support or otherwise. That isn't what royal confirmation means.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention. And clearly, here we are engaged in a position of wanting to make sure that we proceed effectively and properly. And I take his suggestion quite appropriately and change my remarks accordingly. So thank you for that intervention. So with that, I will indeed.
I'm very grateful. In 2 years' time, it will be the bicentenary of the Zoological Society of London. And aren't we being rather churlish in discussing only an extension of the lease? Why don't we let the Zoological Society of London have the freehold of London Zoo?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and clearly he and I share a view about leasehold, that we would like to see leasehold abolished completely and freehold be the norm, and common hold in flats, I believe he would agree, would be the case. So we would all like to see freehold abolished. However, of course, this is part of the Crown Estates. So it is a matter, obviously, for the Crown Estates. It is a matter where, if that were to be negotiated between Crown Estates and ZSL, that would be a matter once again for them. But it goes beyond the scope of this bill, beyond the scope of this bill to do so. But I will take his further intervention.
The Crown Estates have a discretion to provide either an extension or a freehold. And the government is enabling those who have got long leases to be able to acquire the freeholds. Why is the government not ensuring that the zoo can have the freehold? Why is there one standard for Crown Estate property and another standard for private landlords?
I do think the honourable gentleman for say-so was absolutely correct. This does go slightly wider than the scope of the bill under discussion, although I take the honourable gentleman's point. But that perhaps is a matter for another day. Bob Blackman.
I thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I take your guidance on that particular issue. And I would just say to my honourable friend, yes, indeed, I would agree with him that this is something that could be and should be potentially negotiated. And, of course, that's something for the discussion to take place with the Crown Estates. It may well be that following the general election and the new Parliament, we might consider that something that we would take forward in a future bill and a future debate. But for today, the debate is about the extension of the lease. And I will indeed.
Honourable friend for giving way. I, along with a number of other members, have been involved with the Society of Antiquaries and discussions that they were having with the Department for Levelling Up about the extending of their lease. I'm very pleased that they've successfully secured a 999-year lease extension. Was a similar length looked at when my honourable friend was putting together this bill?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. We started with the provision of wanting to extend the lease from its current form to 100 years. Indeed, the investors who were approached by ZSL to consider whether this was something that would allow them to do what they require, the investors said, no, this is not enough. It would take a minimum of 150 years. So it is fair to say that with negotiations with the department, with ZSL, myself, we've come to a compromise over 150 years as a extension to the lease. It could be that were the department minded, were Crown Estates minded, that we could look at a 999-year lease extension, but that is what the bill sponsors have requested. That is what I'm pleased to propose, and I hope, obviously, that the House will go along with that proposal, and then this can be granted into law, and then, after the other places had a look at it, that indeed that will come into fruition. If there is then another suggestion that we go for a much longer lease, that can be the subject of yet another bill in the new Parliament, and obviously we could take that forward if it is required. At the moment, it is not required, but as we know, 999 years is effectively a freehold in its meaning. I give way to my honourable friend.
Grateful for him giving way. As we know, if any one of us are homeowners, we know that periodic renovations are required to refresh a commercial offering or our own homes. And it gives me some cause for concern that this current bill is based on the premise of a single renovation of the offer at Regent's Park. And from the comments which my honourable friend has just made, it suggested that the full 150-year extension is required in order to secure this current round of investment. So is it not rather short-sighted to bring forward a bill that solves only today's problem and is blind to the entirely foreseeable problems which come in 25, 40 and perhaps 50 years?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. Clearly, the matter of how long a lease extension will be granted is a matter, obviously, for debate. It's the decision about how much funding is required is a matter, obviously, for the operators who are considering what they want to do and why they want to do it. Clearly, matters may change in the future, but that is what is required to do the work that is required over a lengthy period of time. So I believe that they've made the right assessment. I believe that things can change, as we know, in which case that would lead then, I think, to another negotiation, another consideration of what else is required. But a 150-year lease extension does allow substantial investment to be made and to be made over a number of years. So as matters change, then obviously that investment can be cooled down, utilised, and then built upon as time goes by. So I will end there, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Thank everyone for listening and the interventions that have been made to this on my speech, and indeed look forward to hearing other colleagues that wish to contribute to the debate, and indeed hearing from both the Shadow Spokesman, Shadow Minister, and my honourable friend, the Minister.
The question is that the bill be now read a third time. Dr. Thérèse Coffey.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And it's a huge pleasure to speak in the third reading today. And I want to start by congratulating my honourable friend for piloting this through. It is a passion which he has had many times, and I'm hopeful that we will not only get third reading here today, but it will sail through at the other end. And the reason why this matters has been pretty well set out by my honourable friend, but I think it's worth adding about the strength of what London Zoo brings to wildlife, not just in this country, but around the world, and why, as has already been said, why the extension of the lease matters. Now, it's my understanding, and I understand the sympathy of others about whether or not we should be looking to change the Act to allow for a freehold in this situation. But we have to be pragmatic in what we do, and my understanding is that the Crown Estate's standard lease for buildings is actually 150 years, and as a consequence, that's a sensible conclusion to which my honourable friend put into the bill today. And I think there's a good reason for that, in terms of, as has already been outlined, about what is potential in order to make sure that basically funds can be generated to undertake not only redevelopment, but of course predicting a future income which is necessary to fund many of the activities which the zoo undertakes. Now, I think one of the things that may not, my honourable members may not be aware of, is that several buildings have had to be closed in London Zoo. Now, some of that has been done because of, in terms of the better environments, and a good example would be the reptile house, which did close in October last year, and just over the Easter recess, a brand new reptile experience has been opened in the zoo. I must admit, while bearded dragons may be lovely and glamorous, I'm not a particular fan of snakes, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but I'm sure I have overcome my fear in the past of not even being able to look at a picture of a snake. But nevertheless, it's that important environment in which these animals need to prosper, and the habitat that is absolutely key, and the careful amount of work that has to happen is not cheap. Mr. Deputy Speaker. And one of the things in terms of other buildings have simply been closed. The London Zoo has, I think, 2 listed buildings which need to be maintained to a certain standard, and we know that the costs of that seem to ever increase in that regard. And people should not be thinking, oh, well, this is just, London Zoo could carry on as it is. Actually, in 1992, ZSL Council actually ordered that London Zoo be closed because it was losing money. And that would have been devastating for animals. It would have been devastating for the city, this great city of London. It would have been devastating for the ZSL about the work they do in this country, but also right around the world. And so that is why I'm pleased that we're making the progress that we have, because ultimately London Zoo does have to generate income in order to make sure it can continue to function and operate. So in terms of redevelopment that needs to happen, certain of the buildings have been closed simply because they are not safe. They're not safe necessarily for the animals, and they're not safe for humans. So in that regard, it's important that new sources of finance can come into London Zoo in order to make sure that the environment for animals is the best it can be, but also other ways to make sure it's a visitor attraction. Now, I'm sure my honourable friend the Minister will explain about how I think this is the 10th most visited attraction in our great capital. And of course, there's been significant investment going beyond London. For example, when the Elephant House was closed down, this was reaccommodated by having an appropriate environment elsewhere, up at Whipsnade Zoo. And it is one of those things that I even think I know in DEFRA we hired the Mapping Pavilion last year when I gave a speech on the progress of the Environment Plan. A 25-year environment plan. And it's important that, of course, this is done primarily for the animals there, but it has to be attractive so it can thrive and raise funds. Now, in terms of one of the other aspects I think that my honourable friend did talk about extensively is about the research that is done. This is absolutely a vital part of zoos. And as I said, it's only just over 30 years ago that this zoo could have ended up closing. It is absolutely important to global biodiversity that we see our zoos thrive and all the facilities that go with it and, as I say, the underpinning research. My honourable friend refers, I think, to the programme about Sumatran tigers, one of the most endangered species in the world. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, I had the great privilege last year of feeding one of those Sumatran tigers. I have to admit it was somewhat at arm's length, understandably, and through bars. But nevertheless, it was quite an amazing experience. And I think it is that sort of situation that we need to recognise that the work that happens here in this country and supports the work being done right around the world is why I will continue to support any zoo, but in particular, it's why I've been very keen to support my honourable friend's bill into making sure that not only that the London Zoo will have an opportunity to keep these animals alive and well, but it will have an opportunity to thrive, and that's why I'm supporting the bill today.
I want to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Harrow East, on bringing forward this bill and the amazing way that he dealt with so many interventions on a range of technicalities that have pushed his knowledge and all of our knowledges in respect of London Zoo. Now, we know that zoos have changed very much over the years, and far from being what they once were, as some of us would think, cruel places where animals may have been kept in conditions which we would now rightly deem unacceptable. We've got a proud record in this country of zoos and safari parks that are places of education and protection, conservation and, of course, enjoyment. Now, the London Zoological Society might be a bit of a trek for many from my constituency of Darlington. Our nearest zoo is, I think, at Flamingo Land, just near Pickering, in the constituency of my honourable friend for Thursk and Milton, but this is an excellent opportunity to highlight to my constituents, who are coming to London for whatever reason to add London Zoo to their list of places that they may want to visit. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, I know the work that our zoos do, and particularly at London Zoo, much of their work is indeed groundbreaking and vital to conservation. And they ensure that the children of the future can go and see animals such as Nellie the elephant, Bilbo the baboon, Fletchy the flamingo, and indeed Patronella the pangolin, to observe their beauty and learn more about these amazing creatures. But we must ensure that worries about London Zoo's lease are put to rest. Mr Deputy Speaker, it has indeed been quite fascinating to learn, whilst preparing for today's debate, that London Zoo is leading the way in protecting pangolins, which are the most trafficked animal in the world, with one being poached almost every 5 minutes. London Zoo are a leading partner in their protection, restoration and ecosystems, and work alongside those living with these beautiful, shy and critically endangered creatures.
On that point, would he...
I will happily give way.
I think the work on pandlings is a great example of the international reach of our precious asset of London Zoo. I wonder what the need for that protection is. Why are pangolins so endangered? And what is it that we're doing here in London and internationally to protect them?
I'm grateful to that intervention from my honourable friend from Milton Keynes. I know very little about pangolins, but that I have read in respect of preparation for this debate would indicate that they are trafficked for their scales and meat in the Far East. I'll happily give way.
When I attended the CITES conference back in 2016, pangolins were the big issue. And it's because, as my honourable friend has just rightly said, people assume that the scales are of benefit, but also a delicacy in terms of taste. The issue is that the pangolins are brilliant about protecting themselves against predators by rolling up into a ball. Unfortunately, that makes them the easiest animal to pick up and to be able to be poached. And that is why the work that is ongoing is so critical.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for her intervention and clarification. It is right in this place that we do so much to protect animals, whether they are the dogs and cats that we've done so much good work for already this morning with our first piece of legislation that we passed on to its next stage, but that we can do by dealing with a relatively dry piece of law about lease reform and Crown estates. We can do something that actually helps conservation around the world. So, almost in conclusion, Mr Deputy Speaker, we need to help ensure that London Zoo can ensure they continued their good work by amending the Crown Estates Act of 1961 and increasing the Society's lease to occupy that land for 150 years. This means that the anxieties about their tenure can go away and the Society continue to be a place of enjoyment, leading the way in all that they do, and I'm pleased to be supporting the bill today.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker, and pleasure to speak in this debate, and my congratulations to my honourable friend for the progress he's made with this bill, and I'm sure it has all of our support. Of course we should extend the lease, and to echo the point about the London Zoo, 200 years old, the oldest zoo in the world, began, I'm sure, in the with as it were humble beginnings as a sort of entertainment for the public, has become this incredibly important conservation charity of great global importance. While the honourable member was speaking, I actually thought of the medieval monasteries as barbarism took over the world. Learning and culture retreated into the monasteries. It's almost as if the endangered species of the world have been saved by some of these zoological institutions and are then able to return. And very interesting to hear about the species that have indeed been saved or preserved: kingfishers, tigers, the quagga. Sorry to hear that the zoo didn't in fact help to save the quagga, but it's got some photographs of it at least, which is encouraging. The mountain chicken, which I didn't know about. And Winnie the Pooh, I had no idea of the story, and the only thing is I'm sorry to say it didn't stay in Salisbury Plain. which is part of my constituency, where we would have given Winnie he or she, a happy life. But a very good thing that Winnie ended up in London Zoo, and we can all be very proud of that. So I commend the bill. Obviously, the zoo is a historic institution, one of the reasons we should be so proud of it, but it has a very, very bright future, and I was encouraged to hear from my honourable friend about the plans for the zoo. I wasn't aware that Matthew Gould had taken over as Chief Exec. I knew him slightly when I was a civil servant at DCMS, when he was in charge of the nation's digital policy. It's amazing how people move around in our elite. But why shouldn't he be running the zoo? I'm sure he's obviously doing a great job, because I commend the plans that I hear of it. And actually, with the skills that he brings from his background, I'm inspired by what I hear about the modernisation of the zoo, looking forward, using digital skills, using immersive technology to give visitors an enhanced experience that gets them closer to the reality of the natural habitat that these animals come from, and we hope they or their descendants are able to return to. So it's very encouraging what I hear. I totally agree with my honourable friend's argument that in order to raise the capital that is needed for the long-term investment on the site, the investors will need the certainty that the zoo will be around long enough to fund that, to finance that work. So it's the right thing to do. I also echo the point that wouldn't it be nice if the zoo could be there in perpetuity with the freehold, but here we are. Commend the bill. I'm very pleased to see members across the House supporting it, and I'll be very happy to do so myself.
Ben.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow my honourable friend from Devizes, and he gave an excellent speech, and I must say, with a certain air of a Victorian zookeeper about him today. So thank you very much for that. It is a pleasure to speak in favour of this bill. I support the member for Harrow East in bringing this bill forward. I think it's the right thing to do. I congratulate him for it. Obviously, what we're doing here is actually a very small piece of legislation. It's a tiny blip on the legislative agenda, only a few lines, but it is quite important to amend the Crown Estate Act 1961 to increase the maximum term of lease. And as we covered earlier, the change that we are making at this point does not automatically grant ZSL a lease of 150 years, but crucially, and I'm looking at the Minister here now, it does allow the Department the opportunity to offer this lease and this length of lease in the future. And it's important for so many reasons, as very capably covered by the previous speaker. It's an institution in the UK, but it's also a groundbreaker internationally, our zoo. It's the world's first scientific zoo. The Zoological Society of London is an international conservation charity, saving animals on the brink of extinction, protecting species, restoring ecosystems. But much more than that, as we've heard from the Honourable Member for Harrow East, the tourism that the ZSL London Zoo brings into the UK is absolutely phenomenal. £24 million to our economy every year, and that's just that's just the specific impact. There's the wider tourism pull as well, because of course it's one of many institutions in London that tourists come to visit.
Will the Honourable Gentleman be aware? I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. His constituency in Milton Keynes is far closer and much better connected to London than my constituency is. I wonder if he's aware of how many of his constituents visit London Zoo, and whether indeed his schools in his constituency engage with the zoo to learn about their conservation work.
Thank you. That's a fantastic intervention, because the short answer is actually no. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for me here to investigate with the schools in Milton Keynes North whether they have taken the opportunity to visit ZSL London Zoo, because the educational benefits would be absolutely superb. On his point about connectivity and the ability to get from his constituency to London Zoo and my constituency to London Zoo, I can only assume that he hasn't tried Aviva trains recently, because I'm not entirely sure the journey is going to be much quicker from Darlington as it is currently from Milton Keynes on occasion. But with many attractions, educational and leisure and otherwise in London, the London Zoo can be proud of its position of the 10th most popular tourist attraction in London. But it's about more than education and tourism. The core function of some of the output of London Zoo is conservation, with a global reach. Conservation activities in over 70 countries worldwide. We've seen the reintroduction of many species, but all of this work born out of, Mr. Deputy Speaker, all of this work born out of the physical premises here we are seeking to support with this lease extension. I'm thinking in particular of the reintroduction of the Parthula snail, and the conservation breeding programmes, obviously for northern bald ibis, which is one of the species that hasn't got a mention so far, as is the fen raft spider. And of course, the conservation breeding programme was partly due to the reintroduction of the Parthula snail as well. But rather than these specific things, the ability to work with conservationists in other countries has seen a huge increase in support for wider reintroduction programmes, and that includes griffon vultures and hihi birds and Amur tigers. We've already heard about Goldie the eagle and the story behind Winnie the Pooh and Jumbo the elephant, which is new to me as well in terms of the adding the word jumbo to our vocabulary. And Guy the gorilla, I was amused to hear about the fact that he only understood French. Yeah. And that there is now a statue.
Foreign gorilla. Will you give way on that?
I will. I will give way on foreign gorillas, yes.
Well, it's obviously a matter of deep concern for the House that Guy the gorilla only spoke French. And what I meant to intervene on the honourable gentleman over there to ask whether at the end of his life he was bilingual or not.
We will never know, but perhaps a clue can be found into whether the statue of Guy the gorilla is wearing a beret or not. However, I think as we look at the need for this change to the Crown Estates Act 1961, and in particular Section 7, we know that this small tweak to the length of the lease will allow London Zoo to operate in a much more future-proof way. They have ambitions to create the world's first campus for nature. They want to reimagine the zoo as a series of natural landscapes. And they want to, as the Honourable Member for Harrow East mentioned before, they want to make it truly accessible for all. And I think that goes to the heart of why we're doing this. We want to share the benefits for everybody for generations.
Will the Honourable Member give way?
Yes, I will.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way on that particular issue. One of the grounds for giving them planning permission for further work to take place is indeed that ZSL make available facilities for people with special needs, and indeed for children of the local area to be able to come in and utilise both the garden area and other parts of the premises of the zoo at reduced prices, as I mentioned during my speech. Allowing people locally with special needs to come in for £3 is a great contribution, I think, to allowing community access. And it is vitally important that as we pursue this, that community access continues.
I'm grateful for that intervention, and it leads me to wind up my remarks by saying I can carry on if the Honourable Member wishes me to, but to wind up my remarks by saying that this zoo is a jewel in the crown, not just of London tourism, but of conservation generally. And if we were to succeed in this attempt to allow them to extend the lease and therefore bring in the finance to secure the future not only of the physical assets on the site, but also the work, the conservation work and the education work that they do across the world and here in London, it will be of benefit to generations to come.
James Wilde.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I join in congratulating my humble friend, the member for Harrow East, on bringing forward this Zoological Society of London bill to this stage, and hopefully that it will pass today and make its way through to become law. And it's yet another successful private member's bill which he has shepherded through the House, so I'll have to get some tips from him about how to come up higher in the ballot in order to follow his lead. And I begin by recognising the important role that the Zoological Society of London plays as an international conservation charity. It's driven by its work to restore wildlife in the UK and around the world, saving animals who are threatened with extinction, protecting species, ecosystems, and conducting a lot of research internationally with partners as well. And very importantly, I think it plays a fundamental role in inspiring the next generation of conservationists, which is obviously key. But we're here, obviously, to talk about the impact that this legislation could have on the zoo, and that's obviously comes to being about the animals. And in January, the annual stocktake took place at London Zoo, which is no mean feat when it's home to over 300 different species, from the endangered Galapagos giant tortoises, we heard about tortoises in the earlier debate, the Asiatic lions, to critically endangered Chinese giant salamanders and Sumatran tigers. And it was very good news that 3 newborn Asiatic lion cubs were born only a few weeks ago. That's a major boost to conservation when there are only around 600 to 700 living in the wild. And people will be reassured that this annual stocktake, checking how many animals are, checking they're still in the zoo, is part of the licence requirements that the zoo is subject to in order to ensure public protection as well. And the kernel of this bill is about safeguarding the future of ZSL and its important work. And the Society has been very clear about the limitations that the current lease has, in particular on its ability to fundraise and to create new partnerships that will enable it to enhance its work and the support programmes that are available, and those great community programmes that my honourable friend talked about in terms of discretionary access and cheaper tickets for local people to come into the zoo and see what's on offer. And the benefits that a longer lease would offer have also been set out by the Society, and as we consider extending the lease, it's obviously important that we capture those and then we hold the Society to account to deliver on them should they be granted the lease. And at its core is about having the world's first campus for nature with a centre of research and innovation dedicated to protecting biodiversity and strengthening nature. But it's also about enhancing technology. I came across Matthew Gould when he was head of NHS-X, where he did a lot of work in developing the apps and the technology in the NHS and bringing that knowledge and insight to the zoo to have more immersive experiences, I think would be highly commendable. And then the third element they're looking at is about accessibility. And my honourable friend talked about the offer to local communities and local people. But this is a world institution. It is one of the most visited attractions in the country, and I would want my constituents in North West Norfolk, children, people with special needs, to also be able to potentially benefit from that. Obviously, there are travel costs involved as well, but coming to see such a great facility is invaluable for them. As it happens, my first date with my now wife was at London Zoo. We had check out my surname. We had a lovely time, and it obviously has paid off. And I was there a few weeks ago with her, with one of her friends and her 2 young two young twins, and the ability of the zoo to inspire is incredible, watching these two little girls run off to look at the animals as they came towards them. It was great, but clearly when we went on that first date, we were a bit concerned then, which was some time ago, about the state of the facilities. Some of the cages and the signs that were on assuring you that the animals were not in distress, even though they may have been pacing backwards and forwards. So there's an urgent need for better modernisation, and when I went back a few weeks ago, some of those enclosures had been improved. I think about the penguin area in particular, which is now a great facility and one of my favourite parts of the zoo. A few people have spoken about Guy the gorilla, and I understand that the tooth decay was actually caused by him being fed sweets by people visiting the zoo. So it's very important not to feed the animals unless you are a zookeeper. I think it's important to get that on the record. I would be happy to. Yeah.
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Of course, gorillas are herbivores, and therefore they should only be fed, as he quite rightly says, by keepers, and certainly not be fed sweets. But does he also realise that gorillas have 98.4% DNA shared with human beings? So they're very close to human beings, and therefore, quite clearly, as tooth decay in humans is of concern when particularly young children eat sweets, so does the same thing apply to gorillas.
My friend makes a very interesting observation, and from a sedentary position we heard a comment about dentistry, and I could talk about the need for more dentists and dental vans in North West Norfolk, but obviously that would be beyond the scope of this debate, so I won't encourage you to stand up, Mr Deputy Speaker, to make me be quiet. And of course, as my old friend from Milton Keynes North has pointed out, this is an enabling power. There's no guarantee of an extension here, and I think it comes back to the plans that are put forward by ZSL that then convince that they are deserving of this extension, so that can be put forward and they can be held to account to it and then go off and raise the funds to enhance this world-class facility. So to conclude, Mr Deputy Speaker, I think having opened in 1826, the zoo will soon be celebrating 200 years, and this bill, this important piece of legislation, will help ensure that it continues to play the crucial role that it has since then in protecting animals by providing better enclosures, better facilities for them, ensuring the vital research continues, whilst remaining a leading visitor attraction where people can come and learn more about our wonderful world.
Yeah. Chris Bryant.
I concur.
Julia Lopez.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I should like to thank my honourable friend for Harrow East for bringing forward this private members' bill on the Zoological Society of London and the maximum lease term that may be granted to it, which has now reached its concluding stages in the Commons. I should also like to thank my honourable friend for Christchurch for casting his beady and expert eye over this bill and withdrawing his amendment. As he can see, it led to a degree of shock, perhaps even gentle chaos, which I think it should be seen as a tribute to his fearsome reputation for ruthless and relentless scrutiny. And I'd like to see that scrutiny taken up, that mantle of scrutiny taken up, by my honourable friends for Devizes, for Broadland, for North West Norfolk, Milton Keynes North, Darlington and Suffolk Coastal. And it was good to hear my right honourable friend for Suffolk Coastal's particular expertise as a former Environment Secretary, and I thank them for their scrutiny of this bill. Of course.
I'm grateful for my honourable friend for giving away. The amendment that my honourable friend for Christchurch put forward was about differentiating between residential areas within the zoo itself and other properties. Obviously there have been some discussions which I have not been privy to. I'd be grateful if she could perhaps elaborate a bit on what residential properties there are within the zoo and whether those are purely there for the zookeepers. Obviously there is no working time directive for animals, I think one of my colleagues made, so obviously there is a case for that, but it would be good to understand a bit more about what is the footprint of the residential areas.
Well, I shall come on to that later on in my speech, but my understanding is about 3 properties, but I probably come and contradict myself later as I come to this matter in the speech. Now, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport is the government sponsor of this bill. Our interest lies in the location of London Zoo within Regent's Park, where the proposed extension of the maximum lease term grantable will be enacted. Regent's Park is under the management of the Royal Parks Charity, and they are sponsored by my department. Ultimately, the 8 royal parks are owned by the Crown, with their responsibility resting with the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. But I take an interest also as a London Member of Parliament, the Tourism Minister, and it was raised by my honourable friend for Harrow East that this is a very important piece of the visitor economy, both locally and nationally, but also in having 2 young children who I think would benefit from visiting this tremendous attraction. Certainly.
I think we've recognised the importance of the ZSL London Zoo as a tourist attraction in and of its own right, but I wonder what her thoughts are about its fit with the wider tourist ecosystem within London and within the UK.
Well, I think this debate has proved in itself that simply by talking about London Zoo, we can learn about all the other animal-based visitor attractions all across the country, including Flamingo World near Darlington. The bill proposes a small amendment to the Crown Estate Act 1961 to extend the maximum lease grantable to the Zoological Society of London from 60 years to 150 years. Now, although the lease was most recently renewed in 2021 for the current maximum term of 60 years, as any well-managed and forward-thinking organisation should do, the Zoological Society of London wished to further extend the maximum lease term in order to secure longer-term investment and continue to develop the historic site at Regent's Park. Of course.
In one of my earlier interventions, I talked about the campaign that was a number of colleagues were involved in with Burlington House, where a lot of expert societies are based, which is the freehold to that is responsibility of the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. And we finally got a good agreement from the Minister there to extend the lease to 999 years. And I'd just be interested in any reflections the Minister has in terms of that length of time compared to the 150 years proposed in this bill.
Yep. Minister.
Well, my understanding, which I've learned during the course of this debate, is that the 150 years is a Crown Estate specific lease, and I imagine that's for all sorts of historical reasons, but I'm happy to go into those in writing to him at a later date. The government views the extension of the maximum lease term grantable to be a relatively uncontroversial change that will positively impact the organisation, allowing it to build its resilience, develop strategic philanthropic relationships, and increase the scope for potential commercial partnerships that will ensure its continued growth. It's also important to note that establishing the mechanism for a longer lease term will bring the Zoological Society of London in line with other similar organisations who hold leases on Crown Estate land, including the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew. The maximum allowable lease for the Royal Botanic Gardens in respect of land in Kew Gardens was extended from 31 years to 150 years following the introduction of a bill in 2019. Granting a maximum lease term of 150 years to the Zoological Society will significantly and positively impact the organisation's aims. For example, the Zoological Society is at the forefront of the effort to reverse biodiversity loss, one of the biggest challenges of our time. A longer lease will allow for the creation of the world's first campus for nature, a transdisciplinary centre of research and innovation dedicated to the protection of biodiversity and strengthening nature. Will also help reimagine the zoo's landscape, providing ecosystem-driven spaces designed with an understanding of how each animal now thrives, and providing the assurance that our most at-risk species will be cared for and protected well into the future. Of course.
I'm grateful for the Minister giving way. We talk a lot in this House and in committees, and I sit on the Environmental Audit Select Committee, about the challenges of biodiversity net loss across the world, and as well as in this nation. About 70% of biodiversity has been lost since I was born in 1970. But a lot of that is driven by climate change. And I just wondered whether the Minister would be able to expand a little bit on the plans that the zoo has to deal with climate change in its educational programmes, whilst also dealing with it in its programmes to protect the long-term future of those species.
Well, my understanding is part of the offer that the zoo has in having this lease extension is that it will deepen its partnerships and relationships with some of the nearby institutions. That includes local universities and other scientific institutions, and I imagine that shared learning will help to advance our understanding of climate change and its impact on biodiversity. And I should also note that this government, under the Environment Act, I believe, brought in the concept of biodiversity net gain, where we are seeing the impact of construction offset in relation to wildlife by commitments by developers to enhancing our local environments. The Zoological Society of London's future aims are befitting of an organisation of their high calibre. The Society will extend and contribute to London's Knowledge Quarter, and I referred to this in my comments just now, which is an established landscape of world-leading science and research institutions. It spans from Camden Town to Holborn and Covent Garden. The Zoological Society of London has always worked closely with its neighbours, other world-class institutions including University College London and the Royal Veterinary College. They wish to deepen those connections to form a network of learning, knowledge-sharing, scientific exploration and practice. We're confident that the Zoological Society of London has the ambition, expertise, place and drive to realise the opportunities ahead and bring this amazing special campus to life. As conservation zoos, both London Zoo and its sister site at Whipsnade care for more extinct in the wild species than any other zoos in the UK. London Zoo is part of vital breeding programmes for more than 100 endangered species, from the Socorro dove to the Sumatran tiger. Limiting the maximum lease term grantable to 60 years curtails the magnitude of the zoo's impact. London Zoo's animals, as we've heard today, have inspired a lifelong love of animals amongst its visitors for over 2 centuries. Some notable names include Widdy, an American black bear deposited at the zoo in 1914 at the start of the First World War. Now, as the honourable member, honourable friend for Harrow East, has set out, she was visited by A.A. Milne and his son Christopher, and to this day lives on in the stories of Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin. There is also, as we have heard, Guy the gorilla, spoken of lyrically by my honourable friend for Harrow East. Arriving on Guy Fawkes Day, certainly.
I do wonder, throughout the course of this debate, we've consistently referred to him as Guy the gorilla. However, he spoke French. Surely he's Guy the gorilla.
That surely has to be one of the best interventions on record. I apologise, and I shall correct the record. There's also Guy the gorilla, who was spoken of lyrically by the... that is true. As we've heard, he would first only respond to French, having spent the first 6 months of his, the 6 months preceding his arrival in a Parisian zoo, and his statue remains much loved by the zoo's visitors. I should also like to add to this collection the Goldie the eagle we have heard about, but my own admiration for Ricky the rockhopper penguin, whom I met when I was keeper for the day, and now find myself heading to Google quagga, which I'd not heard of before, and may I say, the touching account of the life of Jumbo the elephant brought a solitary tear to my eye, and that was quickly wiped away by the tales of the Northwest Norfolk, my honourable friend for Northwest Norfolk, of how the wild animals of London Zoo lit inside his heart his own inner wild animal. Now, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport also recognises the immense value that the Zoological Society of London has within the capital and the nation at large, and it wishes to support all initiatives to make sure it has a strong future. Now, throughout its 195-year history, London Zoo has solidified its reputation as an important and unique part of our capital's heritage, culture and tourism offer. The capital's 10th most visited attraction, it contributes over £24 million annually to the local economy and over £54 million to the national economy. It's also the world's oldest scientific zoo, operating since 1828, and a world-leading force in wildlife conservation and biodiversity. Charles Darwin, with his significant contributions to our understanding of science, became a Fellow of the Zoological Society of London in 1839. During his time at London Zoo, he studied the behaviour of animals and developed his revolutionary theories. Today, Darwin's history is safeguarded in London's Zoo's library, and the zoo also safeguards the pangolin, and there's been extensive debate on pangolins. It's an issue very close to my own heart, as my niece and nephew held a very successful pangolin bake sale at a time when they were most in the news. They are, as we have discussed, the world's most trafficked animal, and just to clarify for honourable members, that's because of their value as bushmeat, as a delicacy, as scales used in traditional medicine, but also their skins that are used for boots and belts. Now this, of course.
My honourable friend has been very generous in giving way. The Chief Executive of the Zoological Society has said how this bill will secure the future of ZSL and London Zoo, ensuring it continues to inspire and educate millions, continue to do world-leading science and conservation, and keep strong and important, much-loved institution. Does she have a sense of the scale of the investment that extending this lease will unlock, in terms of the modernisation, the improvements, this world-class research facility that's going to be created through this bill?
Well, good question.
Well, as we have heard from my honourable friend for Harrow East, this will unlock substantial investment in the site that will mean the renovation of historic listed buildings, but also the creation of new habitats that are more appropriate for now that we understand more about the animals that they contain. And we firmly believe that this zoo is a historical asset worth championing and protecting for future generations. From its beginning, many leading architects have contributed to the zoo's built environment. There's a collection of buildings that includes 2 Grade 1 and 8 Grade 2 and 2-star listed structures. The Grade 1 listed penguin enclosure, designed in the international modernist style by Berthold Lebutkin and constructed in 1934, is described by Historic England as a key symbol of British and international modern movement architecture. Advances in our understanding of animal welfare have shown that many of the current structures within the zoo's premises are simply no longer suitable for their intended purposes. And although the zoo achieved many firsts, including the first reptile house, public aquarium, insect house and children's zoo, there is work ongoing to reimagine these spaces in new, innovative and sustainable ways. Throughout, the Zoological Society of London's efforts will ensure their central aims of conservation and care for endangered species remain at the core. The work of the Society and the Zoo supports the environmental principles as outlined in the Environment Act 2021. The continued existence of the zoo will preserve both wildlife and other natural assets within its built environment and champion measures to reduce biodiversity loss. It's also important to note that the extension of this lease does not equate to extension of land occupied, and the remainder of Regent's Park will be unaffected by this change. Of course, there's reason to question our support of this bill in regards to the impact on the public purse. I will take this chance to confirm that neither the Zoological Society nor London Zoo specifically receive any grant and aid from the government. While the Society is the recipient of research grants from Research England and grants from the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs for international and domestic conservation work, these are applied for through official programmes. There will therefore be no significant impact on government funding or accrual of public debt if the organisation's maximum lease term were to be extended. Now, as a charity, the Zoological Society of London raises the vast majority of its income from its members and, of course, visitors to its conservation zoos, including London Zoo. Additional field projects, including their Community Banks Initiative and Rhino Bond Scheme, are funded through partnerships with funders across the globe. Looking forward, in 2028, London Zoo will celebrate 200 years since its opening, and I'm sure I'm not alone in wishing it success in the next 200 years, with continued modernisation and redevelopment. This will allow its animals to thrive, including through the development of the biodiversity campus to champion the needs of nature across sectors and increase public engagement and learning opportunities. In addition to befitting its animals, research and scientific aims, benefiting, an extension of the Zoological Society of London's lease for London Zoo will provide an essential opportunity of access to nature, respite and well-being for people of all ages and every background. In the half-term of February last year, London Zoo's Community Access Scheme enabled over 50,000 people on low incomes and other benefits to access the zoo for only £3. Accessibility is a core aim of the zoo, which also runs audio-described tours, sign language tours and early opening mornings aimed at autistic and neurodiverse visitors. Over 80,000 school students visit the zoo each year, learning about wildlife conservation and the effects of climate change and plastic pollution. Protecting the future of this organisation through the extension of the maximum lease term makes sure that it will continue to educate and inspire the next generation. The Government is committed to supporting the Zoological Society of London's ambitions for improvements and investments to make sure their continued role as leaders in the field. Introducing an extension of the lease term is part of that much-needed support. We're assured that this bill will offer the necessary support and protection to the Zoological Society of London and London Zoo, and I'm very, very pleased to affirm our support of this bill, and I once again thank my honourable friend for bringing it forward.
The Leader of the House, Bob Blackman, to wind up the debate.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And with the Leave of the House, I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the Minister, for her contribution and indeed her support throughout the progress of the bill. The Shadow Minister for his very brief support for the bill, but it's great to have this on an all-party parliamentary basis so that we can send the signal to the other place that there is cross-party support for this measure. And indeed, for my honourable friends who, for their interventions that tested my knowledge of the position, and for their contributions that they made. And my honourable friend, right honourable friend, of course, who was as previous Environment Secretary, indeed was involved heavily in the construction of this bill and giving her blessing whilst she was in post. And I would like to obviously just say, I would like to thank the honourable member for Christchurch as well, who managed to propose an amendment, then withdraw it on the basis of reducing the lease, and then during contribution during the debate extending the lease. I know that we can often take contradictory positions in debates, but however, he managed to do that today, and I'm grateful for him for withdrawing his amendment and allowing us to proceed on to third reading appropriately. I'd also draw attention to one of the problems that was raised during the debate, namely that in terms of the inefficient buildings that there are, London Zoo's energy costs rose from £1.4 million in 21-22 to £3.7 million in the following year. The reality of this is the old buildings, which are obviously housing many of the endangered species, these endangered species need high temperatures on a consistent basis. You can't tell a tiger to go and put a jumper on or have a hot water bottle. You've got to give the heating appropriately to it. Can I also obviously thank Matthew Gould and his team for both bringing forward and inviting me to take this bill through its common stages. I would like once again to echo my thanks to the Public Bill Office for their help and support and guidance as we've taken the bill on, to my office and my parliamentary assistant, Hattie Shoesmith, for her help in formulating both my speeches and contributions. And I'd like to thank the honourable members who served on the Bill Committee, namely those for Clwyd South, Coatbridge, Creston and Bellshill, Congleton, Rotherham, Suffolk Coastal, Copeland, Penrith and the Border, Hornchurch and Upminster, Warrington North, Lancaster and Fleetwood, Malden, North Herefordshire and Kenilworth and Southern. They all gave their support during the committee stage of this bill, and although we were not able to have a full second reading debate, I think we have tested this bill both at committee stage and indeed very thoroughly at third reading. I hope, Mr Deputy Speaker, this bill will now pass without dissension, and that we can wish it well and Godspeed through the other place, and that no doubt the Lordships will look at the manuscript and from Hansard from our deliberations and allow this bill to proceed through the other place so that we can safeguard London Zoo for the enjoyment of people long after we've all left this earth. Because the reality is the conservation work that is done by London Zoo, the scientific research that is done by London Zoo, and of course the joy for those people that visit London Zoo to see these endangered species and to see species they would never ever see otherwise, other than on their TV screens, is something that we all welcome, we all want to preserve, and we wish the bill well. We wish the London Zoo well in the work that they do, and I trust that we will ensure that the lease is extended as we wish.
The question is that the bill be now read a third time. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Order.